Samuel Morrison stood in the middle of his dusty ranch, looking at what was left of his life's work. The Arizona sun beat down on him like it had something personal against him. It was 1887, and the drought had been going on for 3 long years now. 3 years of watching the land dry up, watching his cattle die one by one, watching everything he'd built slowly fall apart. He walked toward the barn, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. The barn that used to be full of hay and supplies was almost empty now. The wooden walls creaked in the hot wind, making sounds that reminded him of better days. Days when his wife was still alive, when the ranch was thriving, when he actually had hope for the future. His wife had died last winter. The sickness came quick and she was gone before the spring arrived. She'd been his partner in everything. She was the one who kept the books, who knew which cattle were due to calf, who remembered to save seeds for next season's planting. Without her, Samuel felt like a ship without a rudder, just drifting wherever the current took him. The bank letter was folded in his shirt pocket. He didn't need to take it out to know what it said. He'd read it so many times he had it memorized. Pay the debt by the end of the month or lose the ranch. Simple as that. Cold and clear, just like numbers always are. They didn't care about droughts or dead wives or broken dreams. The bank wanted their money, and if Samuel couldn't pay, they'd take his land. He'd tried everything. Sold off the cattle at terrible prices because nobody wanted to buy livestock during a drought. Sold his wife's jewelry, which broke his heart but had to be done. Sold tools, furniture, everything that wasn't nailed down, but it still wasn't enough. The debt was like a monster that just kept growing, no matter how much he fed it. Samuel walked over to the only stall that still had an occupant. Dancer, his Appaloosa mare, stuck her head out and nuzzled his hand. She was beautiful, with a coat that looked like someone had splattered white paint across her brown body. Her eyes were gentle and intelligent. She'd been a gift from his wife on their 10th anniversary 5 years ago. "Hey, girl," Samuel said softly, running his hand down her neck. "You're about the only friend I got left." Dancer had been his wife's favorite. She used to ride her every morning, saying it was the best way to start the day. After she died, Samuel couldn't bring himself to ride Dancer much. It hurt too much, remembering how his wife would smile when she was in the saddle, how free and happy she looked. But now, Dancer was all he had left that was worth anything. A horse like her could fetch $200, maybe more if he found the right buyer. That money could save the ranch, could pay off enough of the debt to keep the bank from taking everything. It was the logical thing to do. The smart thing to do. Samuel had been putting off the decision for weeks now. Every day he'd wake up and tell himself today was the day he'd ride into town and find a buyer. And every day he'd find some excuse not to do it. Fix a fence that didn't really need fixing. Clean out a water trough that was already clean. Anything to avoid making that final choice. He thought about his wife and what she would say. She'd probably tell him that things were just things, that you can't take them with you when you go. She'd always been practical like that. But she'd also loved this horse, loved this ranch, loved the life they'd built here together. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Samuel gave Dancer one last pat and walked back to the small house. It felt empty without his wife there. Her chair still sat by the fireplace where she used to do her knitting. Her apron still hung on the hook by the kitchen. He couldn't bring himself to put those things away. He sat down at the table and pulled out the bank letter one more time. The words hadn't changed. He had 2 weeks left, 14 days to come up with money he didn't have, 14 days before he lost everything. Samuel put his head in his hands. He was tired, tired of fighting, tired of struggling, tired of losing. The drought had beaten him. The land had beaten him. Life had beaten him. He felt like giving up, just walking away from it all and starting over somewhere else. Somewhere it actually rained. Somewhere the dirt wasn't always dry and cracked like an old man's hands. But he couldn't do that either. This ranch was all he had left of his wife. Her memory lived in every fence post, every tree they'd planted together, every square foot of this stubborn, unforgiving land. Leaving would feel like abandoning her all over again. Tomorrow, he told himself. Tomorrow he'd make a decision about Dancer. Tomorrow he'd figure something out. That's what he'd been telling himself for weeks, but maybe tomorrow would actually be different. He didn't know it yet, but tomorrow would indeed be different. Tomorrow would change everything. Tomorrow a young girl would walk up to his gate with a single dollar in her hand and desperation in her eyes. Tomorrow Samuel would have to choose between saving himself and helping a stranger. But tonight he was just a tired man sitting alone in an empty house, wondering how his life had fallen apart so completely. The wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled at the rising moon. Samuel closed his eyes and tried to remember what hope felt like. He used to be a different man, happy, full of plans and dreams. He and his wife were going to build something great out here. They were going to raise cattle, maybe have some kids, grow old together watching the sunsets from their porch. That future was gone now, buried alongside his wife in the small cemetery on the hill. The ranch house creaked and settled as the temperature dropped. Samuel finally got up and lit a lamp. The yellow light pushed back the darkness a little, but not enough. Never enough. He made himself some coffee and stale bread for dinner. Didn't have much else. His appetite was gone anyway. As he sat there in the quiet, he thought about his wife's last words to him. She'd held his hand and told him to be kind. Always be kind, because kindness comes back to you when you need it most. At the time, he'd nodded and agreed, but he didn't really believe it. Life hadn't been particularly kind to him. Still, those words stuck with him. Be kind, even when it's hard. Even when it costs you something. That was who she was, and she'd wanted him to be that way too. Samuel wondered if he had the strength to honor that, especially now when he had so little left to give. The night stretched on, and eventually Samuel blew out the lamp and went to bed. Sleep didn't come easy these days, but exhaustion usually won out eventually. As he lay there in the darkness, he didn't know that his life was about to take a turn he never could have imagined. That sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can create the biggest miracles. That tomorrow everything would change. The next afternoon, Samuel was mending a section of fence that didn't really need mending. It was just something to do, a way to keep his hands busy and his mind from thinking too much about the impossible choice ahead of him. The sun was brutal, hotter than it had any right to be, and sweat dripped down his face as he worked. That's when he heard footsteps approaching. Not the heavy boots of a ranch hand or a neighbor. These steps were lighter, quieter. Samuel looked up and saw someone walking toward his property. At first he thought maybe the heat was playing tricks on him, making him see things that weren't there. But no. There was definitely someone there. A young girl, maybe 16 years old, walking with purpose toward his gate. She was Apache. He could tell from her traditional dress and the way she carried herself. Samuel straightened up, wiping his hands on his pants. It wasn't often that Apache people came to his ranch. Relations between settlers and the tribes were complicated these days, sometimes peaceful, sometimes not. The girl stopped at the gate and looked directly at him. She had dark eyes that held something Samuel recognized immediately. Desperation, fear, determination. He'd seen that same look in his own mirror plenty of times lately. "Hello?" Samuel called out, walking toward her. "Can I help you with something?" The girl spoke, but her English was broken and hard to follow. She mixed in Apache words that Samuel didn't understand, but she was pointing at something, gesturing urgently. Samuel followed her finger and realized she was pointing at the barn, at Dancer. His heart sank a little. Of course she wanted the horse. Everyone who'd seen Dancer knew she was special. But what happened next surprised him. The girl reached into a small pouch tied to her belt and pulled out a single coin, a silver dollar. She held it out to him with both hands like she was offering him a treasure. Samuel almost laughed, but it would have been a bitter, sad laugh, so he held it back. $1 for a horse worth 200? It was impossible. Ridiculous, even. He started to shake his head, started to tell her no, that it couldn't be done, but the girl started talking faster, more urgently. She kept saying words in Apache, and Samuel caught a few that he recognized. Brother. Sick. Mountain. Help. She made gestures that told the rest of the story. Her hands showed someone lying down, someone in pain. Then she pointed to the mountains in the distance, the ones that rose up like giants on the horizon. Samuel's throat tightened. He understood now. Her brother was sick. She needed to get to someone in the mountains, probably a healer or medicine person, and she needed a horse to get there fast. Time mattered. Maybe life and death mattered. "How sick is your brother?" Samuel asked slowly, knowing she might not understand all his words, but hoping his tone would carry the meaning. The girl's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She was strong, this one, proud. She made a gesture across her throat and shook her head. Bad. Very bad. Then she held up the silver dollar again. pressing it toward him with shaking hands. This was all she had. Samuel knew it without being told. $1 was probably everything to her, her family's entire savings. And she was willing to give it all for a chance to save her brother. It reminded him of his own wife, how she'd have given anything for one more day of life, one more chance. Samuel looked at the dollar, then at the girl, then back toward the barn where Dancer waited. His mind started doing the math he'd done 100 times before. The horse was worth $200. He owed the bank $500. Selling Dancer at full price wouldn't even clear his debt completely, but it would buy him time. It would keep the bank from taking everything right away. But this girl was offering $1. One single dollar. If he took that, he'd lose everything. The ranch, the land, all the memories of his wife that were tied up in this place. The bank would come in 2 weeks and take it all. He thought about his wife's last words again. Be kind, always be kind. But how could he afford to be kind when he had nothing left? When he was barely surviving himself? Kindness was a luxury for people who had something to spare, wasn't it? The girl watched him, her eyes searching his face. She could probably see the war happening inside him, the battle between self-preservation and compassion. She didn't say anything more. She just stood there holding out that dollar, waiting for him to make a choice that would change both their lives. Samuel looked at the mountains in the distance. How far did she have to go? 10 miles, 20? On foot, carrying a sick child or trying to drag him along, it would take too long. The boy might die before they got there, but on a horse, a good fast horse like Dancer, they could make it before nightfall. He thought about all the choices that had led him to this moment. Choosing to come to Arizona in the first place, choosing this particular piece of land, choosing to marry the woman he loved, choosing to stay here after she died instead of running away from the pain. Every choice had consequences, had led him down a particular path. And now here was another choice. Maybe the most important one he'd ever make. Take the dollar and lose everything but save a boy's life, or refuse and keep his only valuable possession, but live knowing he'd let someone die when he could have helped. The practical voice in his head was screaming at him, don't be stupid. You can't save everyone. You have to save yourself first. The bank won't care about your good deed when they come to take your land. One good act won't change anything. But there was another voice too, quieter but more persistent. His wife's voice, be kind. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. That's when it matters most. Samuel reached out and took the silver dollar from the girl's hand. Her face transformed instantly, going from tense worry to shocked hope. She couldn't believe he was actually going to do it. Honestly, Samuel couldn't quite believe it either. Wait here, he said, and walked toward the barn. His hands shook as he put the bridle on Dancer. The mare sensed something was different and tossed her head a little. Sorry, girl, Samuel whispered. I know this isn't what we planned, but someone needs you more than I do right now. He led Dancer out of the barn and over to where the girl waited. Up close, he could see she was even younger than he'd first thought. Just a kid, really, but carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, trying to save her brother, willing to give everything she had for a chance. The girl's hands trembled as she took Dancer's reins. She looked up at Samuel and tears finally did fall down her cheeks. She spoke in Apache, words Samuel didn't understand but whose meaning was crystal clear. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. She pulled herself up onto Dancer's back with practiced ease. She was a good rider, Samuel could tell. That made him feel a little better, knowing the horse was in capable hands. The girl said something else in Apache, something that sounded like a blessing or a promise, and then she was off. Samuel watched as she rode away, Dancer's hooves kicking up dust as they headed toward the mountains. He stood there until they were just a small dot on the horizon, until they disappeared completely into the wavering heat. Then he looked down at the silver dollar in his hand. $1. That's all he had left now. $1 in a ranch he was about to lose and a barn that felt emptier than it ever had before. He walked back to the house and sat down on the porch steps. The sun was starting to sink lower in the sky, painting everything in shades of gold and red. It was beautiful in a harsh sort of way. This land was always beautiful even when it was killing you. Samuel didn't know what would happen next. Didn't know if the bank would show mercy or if he'd be homeless in 2 weeks. Didn't know if the girl would make it to the healer in time or if her brother would survive. Didn't know anything for certain anymore. All he knew was that he'd made a choice, For better or worse, he'd chosen kindness over survival. He'd chosen to help someone even when it cost him everything. And somehow, despite all the uncertainty and fear, he felt a small spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Just a tiny bit of peace, knowing he'd done the right thing, even if it was also the hardest thing. His wife would have been proud of him. That thought made his eyes sting with tears, but they were different tears than the ones he'd cried before. These ones felt clean somehow. Pure. As the sun set completely and darkness crept across the land, Samuel went inside. He placed the silver dollar on the table and looked at it for a long time. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring. But tonight he'd sleep a little easier, knowing he'd honored his wife's memory in the way that mattered most. Samuel barely slept that night. He kept seeing the girl's face in his mind, the desperation in her eyes, the way her hands had trembled when she held out that single dollar. He kept wondering if she'd made it to the mountains in time, if the healer could save her brother, if Dancer had gotten them there safely. But he also kept thinking about his own situation. The bank letter seemed to grow heavier in his pocket with each passing hour. 2 weeks. That's all he had left. 14 days before they came to take everything, and he'd just given away the one thing that might have saved him. When the sun finally rose, Samuel got up and made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he and his wife had shared thousands of meals together. She used to sit across from him, telling him about her plans for the day, laughing at his jokes, being the light that made everything worthwhile. He remembered one particular morning about a year before she got sick. They'd been talking about the future, making plans for the ranch. She'd said something that stuck with him now. "You know what I love about you?" she'd said, reaching across the table to hold his hand. "You always try to do the right thing even when it's hard, even when nobody's watching." At the time, he'd laughed it off, told her she was giving him too much credit, but she'd squeezed his hand and shook her head. "No, I mean it. You're a good man. Don't ever lose that, no matter what happens. Promise me." He'd promised. Of course he'd promised. How could he know that less than a year later she'd be gone? How could he know he'd be sitting here alone, broke and desperate, trying to figure out if that promise still mattered when everything else had fallen apart? The morning stretched on. Samuel tried to keep himself busy, but his heart wasn't in it. He walked around the property, looking at everything with new eyes. The fence he'd built with his own hands. The small garden his wife had started, now mostly dead from the drought but with a few stubborn plants still clinging to life. The porch where they used to sit in the evenings watching the sunset together. All of this would be gone soon. The bank would sell it to someone else, probably for pennies on the dollar. Someone who didn't know the stories, didn't know that this fence post was where his wife had carved their initials one summer afternoon, didn't know that tree was planted on their first anniversary, didn't care about any of it. By afternoon, Samuel was sitting on the porch steps again, lost in thought. That's when he heard something. Horses, lots of them. The sound of many hooves on the dry ground getting closer. His first thought was the bank. Maybe they'd decided not to wait the full 2 weeks. Maybe they'd come early to take everything. His stomach dropped and he stood up, trying to prepare himself for whatever was coming. But as the riders came into view, Samuel realized it wasn't anyone from the bank. It was Apache. A lot of Apache. Maybe 30 or 40 riders all heading straight for his ranch. Fear shot through him. Had he made a terrible mistake? Was the girl's family angry about the trade? Did they think he'd taken advantage of her? Stories ran through his mind of settler tribal conflicts, of misunderstandings that turned violent, of people who'd made wrong assumptions and paid for it. Samuel stood his ground on the porch, trying not to show his fear. If this was going to end badly, at least he'd face it like a man. His hand instinctively went to his belt, but he'd stopped wearing his gun months ago. What was the point anymore? The riders got closer, and Samuel could see them more clearly now. An old man led the group, sitting tall on his horse despite his age. He had the bearing of someone important, someone used to being in charge. Next to him rode the girl from yesterday. She saw Samuel and pointed, saying something to the old man. The group stopped at the edge of Samuel's property. The old man dismounted slowly with the kind of careful movement that comes with age and wisdom. He was wearing traditional clothing that looked important, ceremonial even. The girl jumped down and came to stand beside him. Samuel walked forward to meet them, his heart pounding. This was it. Whatever was going to happen, it was happening now. The old man studied Samuel for a long moment, his dark eyes seeming to see right through him. Then he spoke in Apache. The words were formal, rhythmic, like a speech that had been prepared. Samuel didn't understand any of it. The girl stepped forward. "My grandfather speaks," she said in halting English, clearly working hard to translate. "He is chief of our people. He thanks you for your kindness to his granddaughter." Granddaughter. So the old man was her grandfather. And a chief. Samuel's mouth went dry. He'd sold a $200 horse for $1 to a chief's granddaughter. This could go either way. The chief spoke again, longer this time. The girl listened carefully, then translated. "The sick boy is my grandfather's son, his youngest, his last son. The wars and the sickness from white men took his other children. Only my uncle remained." Samuel felt the weight of those words. This man had lost almost everyone. The sick boy wasn't just anyone. He was the chief's last remaining son, the last hope for his direct family line. Did he? Samuel started to ask, but his voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "Did your uncle survive? Did you make it in time?" The girl spoke to her grandfather, then turned back to Samuel. Her face broke into a smile, the first real smile he'd seen from her. "Yes, the healer saved him. Your horse got us there before the sun went down. My uncle will live." Relief flooded through Samuel. He hadn't even realized how much he'd been worrying about it until that moment. The boy would live. That made everything worth it. Even losing the ranch, even losing everything, at least he'd saved a life. "I'm so glad," Samuel said, meaning it with his whole heart. "I'm so glad he's okay." The chief spoke again, and this time his tone changed. It became more formal, more serious. The girl translated carefully. "My grandfather says you saved his family. You gave great kindness for small payment. You could have taken advantage of me, could have refused, could have demanded more money, but you did not. You saw a child in need and you helped, even though you are also struggling. My grandfather knows this. He sees your empty ranch, your old clothes, your worry. He knows you needed that horse." Samuel felt his face flush. It was strange and uncomfortable being seen so clearly by strangers. He wanted to say something, to defend himself or explain, but the chief wasn't finished. Through the girl, the chief continued. "In our ways, when someone saves your family, you have a debt of honor. Not a debt of money, but something deeper. My grandfather says your kindness must be answered with kindness. This is our way. This is the right way." The chief made a gesture, and the other riders began dismounting. They started unloading things from their horses. Tools, supplies, leather pouches that clinked with the sound of metal. Samuel watched in confusion. "I don't understand. What's happening?" The girl's smile grew wider. "My grandfather is going to help you. He says you saved his family, now his family will save yours." "But I didn't do it for a reward," Samuel protested. "I just wanted to help." The chief understood those words even without translation. He nodded and spoke directly to Samuel, his tone firm but kind. The girl translated. "That is why you deserve help. Those who give without expecting return are the ones most worthy of receiving. My people have lived on this land for many generations. We know secrets that your people do not. We know where the water hides beneath the ground. We will show you. Water." Samuel's breath caught. Water was everything out here. Water meant life, meant crops, meant cattle, meant survival. But the drought had dried up everything. Every well in the area had run dry. Everyone said the water was just gone. "There's no water," Samuel said quietly. "Everyone's looked. The whole territory is dry." The chief smiled for the first time, a knowing smile that suggested he understood things Samuel didn't. He spoke again, and the girl translated. "Your people dig in the easy places and give up when you find nothing. My people know the hard places, the deep places where the water sleeps waiting. We will dig with you. We will find it." Over the next hour, the chief and several elders walked Samuel's property. They moved slowly, stopping here and there, putting their hands on the ground, listening to something Samuel couldn't hear. The girl explained they were reading the land, looking for signs that only they knew how to see. Finally, the chief stopped at a spot about 100 yards from Samuel's house. He drove a stick into the ground and nodded. "Here," the girl translated. "The water is deep, but it is here."
"Strong water."
"Clean water. Enough for many years." Samuel looked at the spot. It looked like every other piece of his property, just dry dirt and sparse grass. But something in the chief's certainty made him believe. These people had survived in this harsh land for centuries. If they said water was there, maybe it really was. I don't know how to repay you for this, Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. I gave you a horse for $1 and you're offering me everything. The chief spoke and the girl translated one final time for the day. You gave us everything when you gave us my uncle's life. Now we give back. Tomorrow we dig. True to their word, the Apache returned at dawn the next morning. Samuel had barely slept again, but this time it was from anticipation rather than worry. He kept thinking about what the chief had said. Water. Deep water. Could it really be true? He was making coffee when he heard the horses approaching. Looking out the window, he saw them coming over the ridge, silhouetted against the rising sun. It was beautiful in a way that made his chest tight. There had to be at least 20 riders, all coming to help him. A stranger, someone they'd met only yesterday. Samuel went out to meet them. The chief dismounted and greeted him with a nod. Several of the younger men were already unloading tools, shovels and picks that looked old but well-maintained. These were people who knew how to work, who understood that survival often came down to hard labor and determination. The girl, Kaya, came over to Samuel. That's when he learned her name. She'd been practicing her English overnight, and her words came a bit easier now. We dig today, she said with a smile. Find water. Save your home. I still can't believe you're all doing this, Samuel said, shaking his head. I don't deserve this kind of help. An older woman standing nearby spoke up in surprisingly good English. My husband says you do. Chief does not give his word lightly. You showed honor. We return honor. This is our way. The woman was the chief's wife, Samuel learned. She'd lived near a mission school as a child and had learned English from the teachers there. She would help translate when Kaya struggled with more complex ideas. The chief walked over to the spot he'd marked yesterday. He knelt down, put his hand on the earth, and spoke in Apache. The other men gathered around him, listening respectfully. Then they all spread out and began preparing the area. What Samuel witnessed over the next hours amazed him. These weren't random people digging a random hole. They worked with precision and knowledge passed down through generations. They cleared the area in a specific pattern, set up supports and frameworks, and organized themselves into teams that rotated through the actual digging. We've done this many times, the chief's wife explained to Samuel. Sometimes we must dig deep to find water. Sometimes we must move our whole village because the old water runs out. We know how to do this work. Samuel wanted to help, but the Apache had a system, and adding someone who didn't know their methods would just slow things down. Instead, he focused on providing what he could. He brought out water for the workers, what little he had. He made food, simple beans and bread, but the Apache women who'd come along shook their heads kindly and took over his kitchen, producing much better meals from the same basic ingredients. As the day wore on, Samuel found himself sitting with the chief, watching the work progress. The chief's wife sat between them, translating their conversation. Why are you really doing this? Samuel asked. I mean, I understand about the honor and repaying kindness, but this is so much more than what I gave you. The chief was quiet for a moment, watching his people work. Then he spoke, and his wife translated. When I was a young man, much younger than you, our tribe was starving. A drought came worse than this one. Our children were dying. We had to leave our homeland and travel far looking for food and water. Many died on that journey. My first wife died. My baby daughter died. I thought I would lose everything. Samuel listened, seeing the old pain in the chief's eyes. We came to a place where white ranchers lived. We expected them to shoot us, to drive us away. We were Apache, and white people feared Apache. But one man, one rancher, he did not shoot. He saw we were starving. He gave us cattle. Not old cattle, not sick cattle. Good young cattle. Enough to feed our whole tribe for many weeks. The chief paused, and Samuel could see the memory was still powerful after all these years. I asked him why. He said his own children had died from fever the year before. He said he could not bring them back, but maybe he could save someone else's children. Maybe that would mean something. Samuel felt tears prickling his eyes. What happened to him? He died 5 years later. His ranch failed, I heard. The drought took everything from him, too. But before he died, I went to him. I brought him gifts, offered to help. He refused. He said he did not help us for reward. He helped because it was the right thing to do. The chief looked directly at Samuel now, his old eyes sharp and clear. I never forgot that man. Never forgot that kindness can exist between people, even when everything says it should not. When my granddaughter came home and told me about you, about the horse, about the $1, I saw that man again. I saw that same spirit. That is why we help you. Because kindness must be answered with kindness. Because that is how we make the world better. Samuel didn't know what to say. The weight of that story, the connection between past and present, it all felt bigger than he could fully understand. I hope I'm worthy of the comparison, he finally said. The chief smiled slightly. You sold a valuable horse for $1 to save a child you did not know. You are worthy. As the sun reached its highest point, one of the diggers called out. Everyone stopped and looked. The man was down in the hole, which had gotten quite deep. He was pointing at something, talking excitedly in Apache. The chief stood up quickly, moving faster than Samuel had seen him move before. He went to the edge of the hole and looked down. Then he turned back to Samuel with a huge smile. Water, the chief's wife translated, though Samuel could see it in everyone's faces. They have found water. Samuel rushed over and looked down into the hole. Sure enough, there at the bottom he could see moisture, dark wet earth, and as he watched, a small trickle of water began to seep up from below. The diggers whooped and cheered. They climbed out and others went down, working to widen the opening to let more water flow. Within an hour there was a steady stream pooling at the bottom of the hole. It will be stronger once we finish, the chief's wife explained. Once we clear the opening fully and let the water flow free. This is good water, Samuel. This will save your ranch. Samuel sat down hard on the ground, overwhelmed. It was real. They'd actually found water on his property. Water that could save everything. Kaya came and sat beside him. You happy? She asked in her careful English. Happy doesn't even begin to cover it, Samuel said, wiping his eyes. I don't know how to thank you all. You already did, Kaya said. You gave horse. You saved my uncle. Now we are even. But it didn't feel even to Samuel. It felt like he'd given a small thing and received a miracle in return. Though as he watched the Apache working together, laughing and talking as water began to flow more freely from the ground, he started to understand something. This wasn't really about equal exchange. It wasn't about keeping score or making sure everything balanced out perfectly. It was about something bigger. It was about recognizing each other's humanity. About helping when help was needed. About being the kind of people who made the world a little bit better instead of worse. Over the next 2 days, the Apache stayed and helped Samuel properly construct the well. They showed him how to line it with stones to keep it from collapsing, how to build a simple pump system that would bring the water up easily, how to create channels that would direct water to different parts of his property. The chief's wife taught him about plants that could survive in dry conditions, about ways to conserve water, about reading the weather signs that might indicate rain or continued drought. Kaya helped him repair fences and showed him tracking techniques her people used to find stray cattle. The men taught him about the land itself, about which areas would be best for planting, which areas were better left alone. They shared knowledge that their people had accumulated over hundreds of years of living in this harsh environment. And slowly, Samuel began to see his ranch differently. What had seemed like a dying piece of useless land started to look like a place with potential. With water and the right knowledge, he could make this work. He could actually survive here. On the third evening, as the well was finished and water flowed clear and cold from the ground, the chief called Samuel over. Through his wife, he spoke seriously. This water is a gift, but it is also a responsibility. Many people in this territory are suffering from the drought. We ask that you share this water with those who need it. Do not be greedy with it. Help others as you were helped. Samuel nodded immediately. Of course. Anyone who needs water can have it. I won't charge them anything they can't afford. The chief smiled. Good, then this gift is truly yours. Use it well. That night, after the Apache had left to return to their own camp, Samuel sat by the new well and listened to the sound of water flowing. It was the most beautiful sound he'd heard in 3 years. The sound of life. The sound of hope. The sound of possibilities he thought were gone forever. He thought about everything that had happened. How 3 days ago he was ready to give up. How a young girl with $1 had changed everything. How kindness had come back to him in ways he never could have imagined. His wife had been right all along. Kindness does come back to you when you need it most, sometimes in ways you never expected, from people you never knew, in forms you couldn't have predicted. Samuel pulled out the bank letter from his pocket one more time. The deadline was still coming. But now, with water on his property, with new knowledge and new friends, he had options he didn't have before. He had hope. Word spread fast in a small territory. Within a week of the well being completed, people started showing up at Samuel's ranch. They'd heard rumors that impossible old Morrison had found water. Real water. Flowing water. In the middle of the worst drought anyone could remember. The first visitor was his nearest neighbor, an older rancher named Tom, who lived about 5 miles east. Tom had been ranching in Arizona for 20 years and had never seen conditions this bad. His cattle were dying, his family was struggling, and desperation was written all over his weathered face. "Is it true?" Tom asked, not even bothering with pleasantries. "You got water?" Samuel nodded and led him to the well. Tom stared at it like he was seeing a ghost. He watched the water flow, clear and cold, and his eyes filled with tears. "How?" was all Tom could manage to say. Samuel told him the story. About Kaya and the $1. About the Apache chief and the debt of honor. About knowledge passed down through generations about where water hides deep in the earth. Tom listened to the whole thing without interrupting once. "So you gave away a $200 horse for $1, and they found you water in return?" Tom finally said. "That's the most insane thing I've ever heard. And also maybe the most beautiful." "I need to bring my wagon here," Tom said. "Fill up barrels." "My cattle are dying, Samuel. I'll pay whatever you ask. Just name your price." This was the moment Samuel had been thinking about. The chief had asked him to share the water, to not be greedy with it. And Samuel's own wife had always believed in helping neighbors. But he also had debts. The bank was still expecting payment. He could charge people for water and maybe finally get back on his feet financially. Samuel looked at Tom's desperate face and thought about how he'd felt just days ago. That same desperation, that same fear of losing everything. He couldn't do it. He couldn't take advantage of someone else's suffering. "Bring your wagon," Samuel said. "Take what you need. Pay me what you can afford when things get better. If things don't get better, don't worry about it." Tom's mouth dropped open. "You're serious? You're not going to charge me?" "I'm serious. The water was a gift to me. I'm passing that gift along." Tom grabbed Samuel's hand and shook it hard. "You're a good man. Better than most. I won't forget this." After Tom left with his wagon full of water barrels, more neighbors started coming. Some came alone, some came with their whole families. All of them had the same look of desperate hope. All of them needed water just to survive. Samuel kept his word. He let everyone take what they needed. Some people insisted on paying something right away. A few coins, some vegetables from a struggling garden, a promise to help repair his fences. Samuel accepted it all with grace, but he never demanded anything. Most people couldn't pay, and Samuel told them not to worry about it. "Pay me back when you can," he'd say. "And if you can't, that's okay too. Nobody should go without water." Within 2 weeks, Samuel's ranch had become a gathering place. People came not just for water, but to talk, to share news, to help each other figure out how to survive. The well had created a community where before there had just been isolated, struggling individuals. But not everyone was happy about it. A wealthy rancher from town, Mr. Harrison, showed up one day with a different attitude than the others. He owned the largest spread in the territory and had enough money to buy water from far away if he needed to. But he saw an opportunity in Samuel's well. "I want to buy your water rights," Harrison said bluntly. "Name your price." "I'll pay fair market value." Samuel shook his head. "The water's not for sale, Mr. Harrison, but you're welcome to take what you need for your personal use, same as everyone else." Harrison's face turned red. "Don't be stupid, Morrison. You're sitting on a fortune here. You could charge these desperate fools whatever you want and they'd pay it. Or sell me the rights and I'll do it. Either way, this water should be making someone rich." "Then I guess it won't be making anyone rich," Samuel said calmly. "Because I'm not charging people to survive and I'm not selling out to someone who will." "You'll regret this," Harrison snapped. "When the bank comes to take your property because you're too foolish to capitalize on your resources. Don't come crying to me." After Harrison left, Samuel sat on his porch and thought about what the man had said. It was true that he could be making a lot of money from the water. Enough to pay off the bank, enough to rebuild his ranch to what it was before the drought, maybe even enough to live comfortably. But every time he thought about charging people high prices for water, he remembered Kaya's face. He remembered how she'd offered him everything she had, that $1 silver for a chance to save her brother. He remembered the chief's story about the rancher who gave cattle to starving Apache because it was the right thing to do, not because there was profit in it. If Samuel started treating water as just another commodity to make money from, he'd be betraying everything that had led to this moment. He'd be betraying the gift he'd been given and the trust the chief had placed in him. The bank deadline came and went. Samuel had scraped together some money from the few neighbors who could afford to pay something, but it wasn't nearly enough to clear his debt. He expected the bank representatives to show up any day to foreclose on his property, but something unexpected happened instead. Tom, his neighbor, organized a meeting of all the ranchers and farmers who'd been getting water from Samuel's well. About 30 people showed up at Samuel's ranch one evening. Tom stood up to speak. "We all know Samuel's situation. We all know the bank's going to take his property if we don't do something. And we all know that if Samuel loses this ranch, we lose access to this water. But more than that, we'd be losing a man who showed us what real generosity looks like." He pulled out a hat and put some money in it. "I'm putting in what I can spare. Not because Samuel asked, but because it's the right thing to do. Everyone here has benefited from his kindness. Time to return the favor." The hat went around the group. Some people put in coins, others paper money. A few who couldn't afford cash wrote promissory notes for labor or goods. When it came back to Tom, he counted it up. "It's not everything you owe," Tom said to Samuel, "but it's enough to buy you more time. Enough to show the bank you're good for it. We'll keep working together, keep helping each other, and we'll get you through this." Samuel was speechless. He'd helped people expecting nothing in return, and now they were saving him. The circle of kindness that had started with a desperate girl and $1 had grown into something bigger than he ever imagined. But the story didn't end there. Word of what was happening at Samuel's ranch reached further than just the local community. A newspaper reporter from town heard about it and came to investigate. He'd heard wild stories about Apache magic and mysterious wells and wanted to know the truth. Samuel told him the whole story, start to finish. About Kaya and the horse, about the chief and the debt of honor, about the ancient knowledge of where to find water, about choosing to share rather than hoard. The reporter wrote it all down, and a week later, the story appeared in the territorial newspaper. Kindness repaid. How $1 and a horse created a miracle in the desert. The story spread beyond just the local paper. Other newspapers picked it up. People started talking about it in saloons and churches, in town halls and homes. Some people thought it was the most inspiring thing they'd ever heard. Others thought Samuel was a fool for not getting rich from his good fortune. But the story had an unexpected effect. Other ranchers and farmers who'd been hoarding what little water they had started to think differently. If Samuel Morrison could share his water freely and still survive, maybe they could do a little more to help their neighbors too. Small acts of generosity started popping up around the territory. A farmer with a working well let his neighbors access it. A rancher with extra hay from before the drought shared it instead of price gouging. A store owner in town started extending credit to struggling families. It wasn't like everyone suddenly became saints. People were still people with all their flaws and selfishness. But the story of Samuel and the Apache had planted a seed. It showed that kindness wasn't just a nice idea. It was a practical way to survive hard times. When people helped each other instead of competing against each other, everyone did better. The bank, facing public pressure after the newspaper story, agreed to restructure Samuel's loan. They gave him more time to pay and better terms. It wasn't out of the goodness of their hearts. They just didn't want to be seen as the villains who took the ranch away from the man who'd become a local hero. 3 months after Kaya first walked up to his gate with a single $1, Samuel's ranch was transformed. The well flowed strong and steady. His neighbors came regularly for water and stayed to help with various projects. The Apache visited often, continuing to share knowledge and building a bridge between two communities that had mostly viewed each other with suspicion before. Samuel stood by the well one evening, watching the sun set in shades of orange and purple. He thought about how close he'd come to losing everything. How one choice, one moment of putting someone else's need before his own survival, had changed the entire trajectory of his life. Kaya rode up on Dancer. The Apache had returned the horse a month earlier, saying their family no longer needed her and she belonged with Samuel. As spring turned to summer, something remarkable happened at Samuel's ranch. What started as an Apache tribe helping a struggling rancher evolved into something neither side had expected. A real friendship, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared goals. Kaya became a regular visitor to the ranch. At first, she came with her grandfather or other tribal members, But as time went on and trust grew deeper, she started coming alone. She'd ride up on her own horse in the early morning, help Samuel with various tasks around the property, and they'd talk. Well, mostly Samuel talked and Kaya listened at first. Her English was improving rapidly, but she was still more comfortable understanding than speaking. Samuel found himself telling her things he hadn't told anyone since his wife died, about his fears, his loneliness, his struggles to make sense of a world that had taken so much from him. Kaya didn't offer empty comfort or meaningless platitudes. She just listened with those serious dark eyes and nodded in understanding. Sometimes she'd share stories from her own life, about losing family members to disease and conflict, about the hardships her people faced trying to maintain their way of life in a changing world. "We're not so different," she said one day, her English clearer than it had been months before. "You lost your wife. I lost my mother and 2 sisters. We both know grief. We both know how hard it is to keep going when everything feels broken." Samuel nodded, feeling seen in a way he hadn't in a long time. "How do you do it? How do you stay strong?" Kaya thought for a moment. "My grandfather says grief is like a stone you carry. It never gets lighter, but you get stronger carrying it. And when you help others carry their stones, your own feels less heavy." It was simple wisdom, but it struck Samuel deeply. He'd been so focused on his own losses that he'd forgotten how helping others had actually made him feel better, not worse. Giving Dancer to Kaya hadn't added to his burden. It had somehow lightened it. The chief started bringing other tribal members to the ranch regularly. They taught Samuel things about the land that he'd never learned in his years of ranching. How to read the sky for weather changes, how to find edible plants in the desert, how to track animals by their footprints and droppings, how to use every part of a plant or animal, wasting nothing. But it wasn't just one-way teaching. Samuel shared his knowledge too. He showed them techniques for managing cattle that the Apache hadn't used before. He taught them about crop rotation and soil preservation. He shared his wife's recipes for preserving food and making medicine from common plants. One of the tribal elders, a man named Two Hawks, became particularly close to Samuel. Two Hawks was around Samuel's age and had also lost his wife several years back. The 2 men would sit by the well in the evening, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. "My people are changing," Two Hawks said one evening. "The old ways are disappearing. The young ones are forgetting the knowledge of our ancestors. We are caught between 2 worlds, not fully belonging to either." Samuel understood that feeling. "My world is changing too. Everything I thought I knew about how things work has been challenged. I used to think success meant having the biggest herd, the most land, the most money. Now I'm not sure what success really means." Two Hawks nodded. "Perhaps success is simply surviving with your honor intact, treating people well, leaving the world a little better than you found it." These conversations planted seeds in Samuel's mind. What if he could create something here that bridged both worlds? A place where Apache and settlers worked together, learned from each other, helped each other survive? He started small. When neighbors came for water, he introduced them to any Apache who happened to be visiting. At first there was awkwardness. Generations of mistrust and conflict didn't disappear overnight. But seeing Samuel and the Apache working together, laughing together, clearly respecting each other, it made people reconsider their assumptions. Tom, Samuel's neighbor, was the first to really embrace the idea. He started asking the Apache visitors about their farming techniques. One of the tribal women showed Tom's wife how to make pottery that could keep water cooler in the desert heat. Tom's teenage son learned tracking skills from Two Hawks that helped him locate stray cattle more easily. "I've lived next to Apache land for 15 years, Tom said one day, "and I knew nothing about these people. I believed all the stories about savages and violence, but these folks are just people, trying to survive, trying to take care of their families, same as us." Not everyone was as open-minded. Some of the white ranchers grumbled about Samuel consorting with the enemy. A few stopped coming to his well altogether, preferring to struggle alone rather than be around Apache people. Mr. Harrison, the wealthy rancher, spread rumors that Samuel had been bewitched or had gone soft in the head, but Samuel didn't care about the critics. He cared about the growing community forming around his ranch, a community where people helped each other regardless of their background or history, where knowledge flowed freely and everyone benefited. The Apache, for their part, faced their own critics. Some of the younger warriors thought the chief was being too friendly with white people. They remembered all the broken treaties, all the violence. All the time, settlers had betrayed their trust. Why should they help the people who'd taken their land? The chief addressed these concerns in a tribal council that Kaya later told Samuel about. "Our anger is justified," the chief had said. "We have been wronged many times. But Samuel Morrison is not those people. He saw a child in need and helped even when it cost him everything. If we become like those who wronged us, if we judge all white people by the actions of the worst among them, then we lose our own honor. We become what we hate." It was a controversial stance, and not everyone agreed. But the chief's wisdom and moral authority carried weight. Most of the tribe supported the alliance with Samuel, even if some did so reluctantly. As summer progressed, the collaboration deepened. The Apache showed Samuel and his neighbors how to build adobe structures that stayed cool in the desert heat. In return, Samuel helped the tribe negotiate better prices for their crafts and goods in town. He used his growing reputation to advocate for fair treatment of Apache traders and to push back against discriminatory practices. One particularly hot day in July, a crisis brought everyone together in a new way. A wildfire started in the dry grasslands east of Samuel's ranch. The flames spread fast, driven by strong winds, threatening both settler ranches and Apache territories. Samuel immediately offered his well as a water source for fighting the fire. Apache and settlers worked side by side through the night, creating fire breaks, hauling water, saving homes and lives. They were too busy surviving to worry about old prejudices or cultural differences. When the sun rose the next morning and the fire was finally contained, exhausted men and women from both communities sat together around Samuel's well, drinking cool water and sharing what food they had. Someone started singing a settler hymn. An Apache joined in with a traditional chant that somehow harmonized with the hymn. Others added their voices, creating something new and beautiful from the combination. Kaya sat next to Samuel, covered in soot and exhausted but smiling. "This is what my grandfather hoped for," she said. "People seeing each other as people, working together instead of against each other." "Your grandfather is a wise man," Samuel said. "I wish more people could see what he sees." "They are starting to," Kaya replied. "Slowly. Change is like water wearing down stone. It takes time, but it happens." The fire and the cooperative response to it marked a turning point. More settlers became willing to learn from the Apache. More Apache became willing to share their knowledge. Samuel's ranch became known as a place where the old divisions didn't matter as much, where people were judged by their character and their willingness to help rather than by their ancestry. The chief's visits became teaching sessions where he'd share Apache history, philosophy, and practical knowledge with anyone interested in learning. Samuel organized gatherings where settlers and Apache could trade goods, share skills, and build relationships. It wasn't perfect. There were still misunderstandings, still moments of tension, still people on both sides who refused to participate. Change is never smooth or easy. But something was undeniably shifting. A new kind of community was emerging, one that drew strength from diversity rather than being divided by it. One evening, as Samuel and the chief sat watching the sunset together with Two Hawks and Tom, the chief spoke through his wife's translation. "When I found the water on your land, I thought that was the gift we were giving you. But I was wrong. The water was just the beginning. The real gift is this." He gestured at the people gathered around the well, Apache and settlers mixing freely, talking and laughing together. "This is what we built together. This is worth more than water or gold or land." Samuel felt emotion tighten his throat. "I sold a horse for $1 and gained a family. Gained a purpose. Gained a reason to believe that people can be better than their worst impulses." "You gave that horse with an open heart," the chief replied. "An open heart receives more than a closed one. This is a law older than any government, truer than any treaty." The newspaper story about Samuel and the well had been just the beginning. As word spread throughout the Arizona territory about what was happening at the Morrison Ranch, more and more people started making the journey to see it for themselves. Some came out of curiosity, others out of desperation, and a few came looking to learn something they sensed might be important. By late summer, Samuel was getting visitors almost daily. Ranchers from 50 miles away would show up with empty barrels, having heard that crazy Morrison was giving away water for free. They'd arrive skeptical, sure there had to be a catch, some hidden cost or condition. Samuel would greet them the same way every time. "Take what you need. Pay what you can afford. When you can afford it. If you can't afford anything, that's fine too. Nobody should go without water. The visitors' reactions varied. Some were grateful to the point of tears. Others were suspicious, convinced this had to be some kind of trick. A few tried to take advantage, coming back multiple times and taking more than they needed, thinking Samuel was too foolish to notice or care. But Samuel had learned something from the Apache about community. It wasn't about keeping perfect accounts or making sure everything was exactly fair. It was about trusting that most people would do the right thing eventually, and accepting that a few wouldn't. The goal wasn't perfection. It was creating a culture of generosity that would outlive any individual's selfishness. One day, a desperate rancher named Bill showed up with his whole family. They'd lost everything to the drought and were about to give up and head back east. Bill had heard about the well as a last hope. "I can't pay you anything," Bill said bluntly, his pride clearly hurt by having to admit it. "We're flat broke. I can offer work instead if you'll take it. But we need water bad. My youngest has been sick and we're down to drinking water that's barely fit for the cattle." Samuel looked at the man's family, 3 kids, all thin and tired looking. A wife who had the hardened expression of someone who'd cried all her tears and had nothing left but determination to keep her children alive. "Fill up your barrels," Samuel said, "and there's no need to work it off unless you want to. But if you do want to stay and help out for a bit, I could use an extra pair of hands. I'll feed you and your family, give you a place to sleep. When you're back on your feet, you can head home or stay, whatever works for you." Bill's wife started crying, which made Bill's eyes go wet too. "We'll stay," Bill said firmly. "We'll work hard. You won't regret this." And they did work hard. Bill turned out to be excellent with livestock and had ideas for improving Samuel's cattle management. His wife was skilled at preserving food and keeping house. The kids helped with smaller tasks and brought life and energy to the ranch that it hadn't had since Samuel's wife died. But more than that, they became part of the community forming around the well. Bill started helping other visitors, showing them around, sharing his own story of how generosity had saved his family. His wife taught other struggling ranch wives her preservation techniques. Similar stories played out throughout the summer. People came for water and stayed to help, or they left but came back later with goods to trade or labor to offer. Some brought news from other parts of the territory. Others brought skills or knowledge that proved valuable. The ranch became a hub, a central point where people gathered to trade not just goods but information, ideas, and support. Samuel found himself at the center of a network he hadn't intentionally created, but that had grown organically from simple acts of generosity. The Apache continued to be regular visitors, and their presence had become normalized. Most of the settlers who came for water had initial reservations about seeing Apache people there. But watching them work alongside Samuel and other settlers, seeing the clear respect and friendship between the two groups, it challenged their assumptions. Kaya, now 17 and speaking English fluently, had become something of a bridge between the two communities. She could explain Apache customs to curious settlers and settler ways to Apache who didn't understand them. She had a gift for finding common ground and helping people see past their differences. One afternoon, a group of cattle ranchers from the northern part of the territory arrived together. They'd organized a sort of delegation to come see what everyone was talking about. These were successful men, not desperate stragglers, and they had a business proposition. Their spokesman, a rancher named Peterson, got right to the point. "Morrison, we want to buy water rights from you. Not for personal use, but for a cooperative venture. There are 12 of us, all with significant operations. We'll pay you a percentage of our profits if you guarantee us access to this well." Samuel shook his head before Peterson even finished. "The water's not for sale. Never will be. But you can take what you need, same as everyone else." Peterson frowned. "You're leaving money on the table. We're offering to make you rich. Why would you refuse?" "Because the moment I start treating water as a commodity, the moment I start thinking about profit instead of people, I lose what actually matters here." Samuel gestured around at the community gathered at his ranch. "Look at what's happened. People helping each other, settlers and Apache working together, neighbors who'd never met before becoming friends." "You can't put a price on that," one of the other ranchers spoke up. "But you could help more people if you had more money. You could dig more wells, help more communities." It was a fair point, and Samuel had thought about it before. "Maybe," he acknowledged, "but I don't think that's how it works. The reason this matters, the reason people care, is because it's not about money. It's about people choosing to be generous even when it costs them something. The moment it becomes a business transaction, it loses its power to change hearts. The ranchers left without reaching an agreement, but Samuel noticed that several of them stayed behind individually to fill their barrels. And over the following weeks, a few of them came back, not with business propositions, but with genuine interest in what was being built at the Morrison Ranch. As fall approached, Samuel realized he needed to prepare for the possibility that the well might attract more people than it could sustainably support. He called a meeting of the regular community members, both settler and Apache. "We need to think about the future," Samuel said to the gathered group. "Right now, the well produces more than enough for everyone who comes. But what happens when word spreads further? What happens in future droughts? We need a plan." The discussion that followed was remarkable. People from different backgrounds who months ago would never have spoken to each other worked together to create a fair system. They decided on guidelines for water use, created a rotation for families who wanted to camp near the well, and established a council that included both settlers and Apache to mediate any disputes. Two Hawks proposed something that initially seemed radical. "We should teach others how to find water like we found it here. Not hoard the knowledge, but share it. If every community had water, no one would depend too much on this well." Some people worried that this would reduce the importance of Samuel's ranch, that it would scatter the community, but Samuel immediately supported the idea. Two Hawks is right. The goal isn't to create dependency. It's to help people survive and thrive. If we can teach others how to find water, how to build communities like this one, that's better than everyone having to come here. So they started doing exactly that. The Apache elders began teaching anyone interested in learning how to read the land for water signs. They explained the geology, the plant indicators, the traditional knowledge passed down through generations. Some people learned quickly, others struggled. But the willingness to share the knowledge freely sent a powerful message. The territorial newspaper sent the same reporter back to do a follow-up story. He spent a week at the ranch observing and interviewing people. The story he wrote was even more widely distributed than the first one. "The Morrison Ranch Miracle Continues," read the headline. The article described the thriving community, the cooperation between settlers and Apache, the free sharing of water and knowledge, and the vision of a different way of living in the harsh Arizona territory. The story reached all the way to the territorial capital. Government officials started paying attention. Some saw it as a positive example of peaceful coexistence. Others worried it might give Apache tribes too much influence or upset the established order. But the most important impact was on ordinary people throughout the territory. Other communities started trying to recreate what was happening at Samuel's ranch. Some succeeded, building their own networks of cooperation and generosity. Others failed, unable to overcome ingrained prejudices and competitive instincts. Samuel received letters from people he'd never met, thanking him for showing that a different way was possible. He also received threats from people who saw his cooperation with the Apache as treason or foolishness. He handled both with the same quiet dignity. One particularly meaningful letter came from a teacher in town. She wrote about using Samuel's story in her classroom, teaching children about kindness, cooperation, and seeing past differences. "You've given these children something to believe in," she wrote. "A vision of a better world that they might help create." 5 years had passed since Kaya walked up to Samuel's gate with a single dollar clutched in her hand. 5 years since a desperate choice had changed everything. And now, in the spring of 1892, Samuel stood on his porch looking out at a landscape that had been transformed in ways he could never have imagined. The drought had finally broken 2 years ago. Rain had returned to the territory, not in abundance but enough to make life sustainable again. But even with the return of rain, people still came to the Morrison Ranch. Not for water anymore, but for something else. For the community. For the vision of how people could live together. Samuel's ranch had become the most successful operation in the territory, though not in the way most people measured success. He didn't have the biggest herd or the most land. He wasn't the wealthiest man around. But his ranch had become a symbol, a gathering place, a model that other communities tried to emulate. The well still flowed strong, supplementing the rainwater and providing security during dry spells. But, more importantly, The spirit of generosity and cooperation that the well represented had taken deep root in the community. It had become a way of life, not just a response to crisis. Samuel himself had changed too. The broken, desperate man who'd been ready to give up 5 years ago was gone. In his place was someone who'd found purpose and meaning beyond his personal losses. He still missed his first wife every day, but the grief no longer defined him. It was part of him, like a scar that had healed but left its mark, and he was no longer alone. 2 years ago, a schoolteacher named Catherine had moved to the territory from back east. She'd heard about the Morrison Ranch and the unique community there. She'd come to teach, to be part of something she believed was important. Catherine was a widow herself, having lost her husband to fever several years before. She understood grief. She understood starting over. She and Samuel had found each other slowly, carefully, two wounded people learning to trust again. They'd married the previous fall, a ceremony attended by what felt like half the territory. Apache and settlers had celebrated together, sharing food and music and joy. The chief himself had blessed the union in both English and Apache, speaking of how two people coming together in love created hope for two peoples coming together in peace. Catherine had brought her own gifts to the community. She'd established a school that welcomed all children, regardless of their background. Settler children and Apache children sat in the same classroom, learned the same lessons, played together during breaks. It was revolutionary and controversial, but it worked. The children who grew up in this integrated environment didn't carry the same prejudices as their parents. They saw each other as friends and classmates first, as Apache or settler second. They were growing up with a different vision of what was possible, and that vision would shape the future of the territory. Samuel walked down to where a new building stood near the well. It was a community center, built with labor donated by dozens of families and materials contributed by local businesses. It housed the school, a meeting hall, and a trading post where Apache crafts and settler goods were sold side by side. Inside, Catherine was teaching a mixed class of about 20 children. Samuel stood in the doorway and watched for a moment. His wife saw him and smiled, that warm smile that still made his heart skip a beat. "Mr. Morrison," one of the children called out. "Miss Catherine is telling us about the dollar and the horse again," Samuel chuckled. The story had become legend around here, told and retold so many times that sometimes Samuel barely recognized it. But Catherine had a gift for making it come alive for the children, for helping them understand the deeper meaning. "It's your favorite story," Samuel said to the boy who was Two Hawk's grandson. "It's everyone's favorite story," the boy replied seriously, "because it shows that being kind is more important than being rich." Out of the mouths of children, Samuel thought. They understood it so simply and clearly. After school let out, Kaya arrived for her regular visit. She was 21 now, a young woman who'd become an important bridge between the two communities. She worked as a translator and mediator, helping to resolve disputes and misunderstandings before they could escalate. "My grandfather wants to speak with you," Kaya said. "He has something important to discuss." The chief had aged noticeably in 5 years. He moved slower now, spoke more deliberately. But his mind was still sharp, and his moral authority in the community remained strong. Samuel went to meet him at the chief's camp, about an hour's ride from the ranch. They sat together in the chief's dwelling, sharing tea and speaking through Kaya's translation. "I am old," the chief said simply. "Soon I will join my ancestors. Before that happens, I want to ensure that what we have built together will continue." Samuel's throat tightened. He'd known this conversation would come eventually, but he wasn't ready for it. The chief had become more than an ally. He'd become a friend, a mentor, a father figure in some ways. "The young people of my tribe, they do not always remember the old ways," the chief continued. "But they have learned new ways here, with you and your people. They have learned that cooperation is stronger than conflict, that generosity creates abundance, that different peoples can build something together that neither could build alone." The chief paused, looking directly at Samuel with those wise, ancient eyes. "I want you to promise me something. Promise that you will continue to teach these lessons, that you will help my granddaughter and the other young leaders maintain this community we have created." that you will not let old hatreds and fears destroy what we have built. I promise, Samuel said without hesitation. This community, this vision, it's become my life's work. I won't let it fade. The chief nodded, satisfied. Good. Because what we started here with $1 and one horse, it is bigger than both of us now. It belongs to everyone. It must outlive us. Samuel understood. The community had to become self-sustaining, had to survive beyond any individual's leadership. That meant building institutions, establishing traditions, training new leaders who understood and believed in the vision. Over the following year, Samuel worked with Kaya, Catherine, Tom, Two Hawks, and other community leaders to formalize the structures that would preserve what they'd built. They created a council with rotating leadership from both settler and Apache communities. They established written agreements about water rights and land use. They documented the knowledge the Apache had shared about finding water and living sustainably in the desert. But more than any formal structure, they focused on teaching the next generation, on making sure the children growing up in this community understood not just what had been created, but why it mattered and how to maintain it. The chief passed away peacefully in his sleep one winter night, surrounded by family. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people, Apache and settler together, all mourning a man who'd had the wisdom and courage to choose peace over conflict, cooperation over isolation. Samuel spoke at the service, his voice breaking with emotion. The chief once told me that when you save someone's family, you create a debt of honor. But he also taught me that honor isn't about keeping perfect accounts. It's about recognizing our shared humanity, about choosing kindness even when it's hard, about building bridges instead of walls. He paused, looking out at the gathered crowd, seeing Apache and settlers standing shoulder to shoulder in their grief. The chief's legacy isn't just in his tribe. It's in all of us, in every person who's been part of this community, in every act of generosity, every moment of cooperation, every time we chose to see each other as people first and anything else second. That legacy will live on as long as we remember and honor what he taught us. After the chief's death, Kaya stepped into a leadership role among her people. She was young for such responsibility, but she'd been trained well, and she had the respect of both communities, which made her uniquely positioned to continue her grandfather's work. Samuel and Catherine's ranch continued to thrive. They had children of their own now, 2 daughters who were growing up in a world their parents could barely have imagined when they were young, a world where Apache and settler children played together without thinking it strange, where cooperation was normal and conflict was the exception. Dancer, the horse that had started everything, lived out her days in green pastures that had seemed impossible during the drought. She was old now, gray around the muzzle, but she was treated like royalty. Children loved to feed her apples and hear the story of how this one horse had changed history. The well, that miraculous source of water that the Apache had found, became something of a shrine. People came from all over the territory to see it, to hear the story, to drink from the same source that had saved Samuel Morrison and sparked a movement. A stone marker was placed beside the well, with words carved by a local craftsman. Here flows water, found through kindness, shared through generosity, sustained through community. May all who drink from this well remember that what we give freely returns to us abundantly. Samuel would sometimes sit by that marker in the evenings, reflecting on the journey that had brought him from despair to hope, from isolation to connection, from losing everything to gaining what truly mattered.